Hi everyone, and I'm very proud to welcome you all to the very first edition of the Big Football Podcast. We're going to be doing something different. We're new, I'm not quite sure what that difference is yet. We're just going to be three friends talking about football, and as if we can't already be different in that aspect, there's only two of us here today. I'd like to welcome you all to a very good friend of mine, Paul.
Hi, Dan.
Nice to speak to you again, mate. We actually did this. We've just been discussing this prior to the call. We actually did a podcast 8 years ago, and for whatever reason, we dropped off. But we're back, and I'm very excited about this, mate. It's been an extraordinary season, the likes of which we'll never see again. It's been incredible. Liverpool have ended the 30-year wait for the title. Leeds have ended their 16-year wait to return to the top flight. We had European champions crowned in August and Celtic eliminated from the next season's tournament within 7 days. Football league clubs have disappeared and almost disappeared, and yet the EFL fit and proper owners test is still in existence. And worst still, Lee Mason is still a professional referee. Paul, what a year 2020's been. Obviously, we could go into the geopolitics a lot, but in terms of football, it's easily been the most disrupted season since. You would wager 1939 would probably be the last time. Obviously, the start of the Second World War.
And I think probably even longer than that, Dan, because that season I did have a look at it when the sort of COVID outbreak first happened. That season was only sort of 7 or 8 games old when war was declared, and so was kind of just abandoned and never thought of again. Which I'm sure is what would have happened quite easily if we were only 8 or 10 games into a football season when COVID had first come on the horizon. The problem was obviously that we were actually sort of 8 or 10 games away from ending a football season, and there were, for example, just here in England, we'd already had a competition conclude in the fact that the League Cup final had already been and gone. We had a situation in both the Premier League and the Championship at the time, where there were sort of clear runaway leaders, and both of them, as you've already alluded to, Dan, had sort of stories attached to that. And I think it made the decisions that had to be taken very, very difficult. And I think we should all be grateful that in the end some common sense and some clear heads prevailed. And I think we got to a situation where, obviously less than ideal, and not having fans in football grounds is not something that I think is sustainable long term. But we got to a situation where we were able to conclude seasons, even if we had to have Champions League final in August.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest fundamental differences to 1939 as well is football is now a multi-billion-pound industry, and the consequences of not finishing the season would have been, I think you're talking a huge percentage of clubs struggling to make it to the next season. Just as, I mean, I know you go to watch Arsenal a lot. I'm a Liverpool season ticket holder. If someone tells me that the season's voided, I'm wanting my ticket money back for every match I've been to. I'm wanting money back for the petrol I spent getting to the ground. Despite the best attempts of West Ham and the bottom six at the time, the prospect of the season being voided was pretty remote, but it was something that was discussed, and to particularly Liverpool and Leeds fans, that would have been a highly unpalatable scenario.
Yeah, and look, they kind of really had two options, which was kind of to finish or to try and find some way of mitigating some of what you're right to identify would have been sort of legal quagmire had they had to pull the season early. Now I know they did that in some countries, and it wasn't a uniform approach across Europe, and we might talk about the fact that UEFA didn't exactly show a leadership role, probably not a huge surprise there in the way that they dealt with the situation. But I think in the end the conclusions, certainly in the Premier League and in the Championship in England, were sensible. There will be clubs lower down, particularly in League One and League Two, and I know at the bottom of League Two in particular, where there are livelihoods on the line of clubs not being in the Football League. There were still some questions to answer there where those seasons couldn't conclude. And again, it comes down to the sustainability of football without fans to a certain extent. And, as you've said, I'm an Arsenal supporter, and my own club have had financial issues and have had to make employees who, bear no responsibility for either Arsenal's sort of situation in terms of being out of the Champions League again or the COVID crisis, that those people have lost their jobs and lost their livelihoods. But Arsenal Football Club can survive for a period of time at least without gate money. The most of the Premier League is in that position because of the fantastic TV deal. That's not going to be the position for League One and League Two teams, and how long they can realistically afford to pay footballers when they're getting no money coming in through the gate is something that, even as we go into now 2020, 2021, is worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah, a season that starts on the 12th of September, which itself is extraordinary. It's practically a month behind, and yet the season is going to be finishing at the same time because we have Euro 2020 in 2021. I can't believe they've not changed the name, but that's the least extraordinary thing UEFA have done arguably over the last few months. If we then go on to, we'll start with the Premier League. We will cover the Football League because there's a lot of stories in the Football League as well. I particularly feel sorry for Coventry's fans not being able to see them ascend back up. They've had a long wait for that. If we return to the Premier League though for now, obviously I've been waiting for the last 6 months forever. I was 5 the last time Liverpool won the league, and I've not been able to celebrate it in the manner of which I would have liked, but I understand, the alternative was call the season, pretty much, or play it behind closed doors. So whilst it was strange watching the team lift it on a converted cop, I could not be more delighted with the season Liverpool have had. The only small irritants is that we didn't get the 101 points, and we should have as well, given the position we were in, but I get the feeling that we decided to treat much of the last 6 or 7 games as pre-season for this coming season, although given the start to this season I'm not entirely sure that's worked out. But
well, I think as well, Dan, and there's a point there that it really is difficult, as much as these are professional players and as much as people will say, no, you just treat it like any other game. Once the business that you've set out to achieve is achieved, it is very difficult to maintain the concentration and the performance levels. And I know Manchester City did it a couple of years ago when they managed to kind of infuse themselves by the 100 points and the 100 goals. But it's a really, really challenging thing to do. And there was noticeable signs in some of those Liverpool performances after the league had been won, that the concentration just wasn't quite as sharp. The intensity just wasn't quite the same. They weren't quite pressing with the same verve as they had previously, and that's kind of human nature. It's natural. I always go back to the fact that when Chelsea first won the league under Mourinho in 2005, and they got more points than the Invincibles had the previous year, there was a lot written about, is Mourinho's team actually better than the Invincibles? Again, the Invincibles won the league with 5 games to go and then drew 4 in a row, which was a similar thing in the sense that the intensity just wasn't quite the same as it had been when they were still fighting to win the Premier League. And it's just natural, it's human nature, but it doesn't take away at all from the season that Liverpool had and the incredible achievement of winning the league, but not only of winning the league, of winning 32 out of 38 games, which isn't, a fantastic feat. And I think what was really impressive, Dan, that maybe goes a little bit unnoticed is, yes, there were games where Liverpool just blitzkrieg teams and killed teams off early in games and won by 3 or 4 goals. But I think back to the games like the game at Aston Villa early in the season where they were 1-0 down with 2 or 3 minutes to go and they fought back. And, there were a lot of those games early on, particularly where maybe they weren't quite at their best. And they found ways to win, and that's something that all championship winning teams have to do, and Liverpool were no different.
Yeah, the Aston Villa game is something that I've said several times. that was the day where I kind of began to knew we were going to do it. Because additionally to that, we were 1-0 down to Villa with 3 minutes to play, but Man City had come back from a goal down. They scored twice in the last 10 minutes as that match was happening. And as the fans are leaving the stadium, I've just got visions of them and the players thinking, we might have caught some ground up on Liverpool here, and suddenly bang, bang, and no ground was being gained. And of course, that game was important because we played Manchester City at Anfield the week after. And that gap, we could have gone from a 4-point gap to a 1-point gap with bad results. Instead, it was a 7-point gap that went to 10, and we never looked back from that point. But what Jurgen Klopp has managed to do with Liverpool is we are multifaceted. We can win games in different ways, as you've rightly said. We don't do it as often as we have done in seasons past, but we are capable of blowing teams out the water. Like the hardest 90 minutes of a team's season is at Anfield sometimes. But we're also quite good at seeing out those games where we're not playing too well. We'll win 1-0 or 2-1, and we just can break teams down in different ways. I'm a bit worried that we may need to make some changes for the coming season, but we'll cover that another time. Obviously, we've got one of the best passers of football in the world. If I would probably suggest in Alexander-Arnold, he can dictate a game not from midfield but from right back, and he gets up and down the line. And we've got Andy Robbo at left back, who's not quite as good on the ball, but he gets forward. So we can use our full backs as effectively as any team. That's certainly something that Pep Guardiola does at Man City as well. He likes to have his full backs get to the byline and pull the ball back. It's what was formerly known as a Pro Evolution Soccer goal is now known as a Manchester City goal. Pulling the ball back from the byline for a tap-in, normally for Raheem Sterling. But I think that's a good segue to move on to Manchester City, actually. They only won the League Cup this season. Would anyone other than Pep Guardiola be under pressure, do you think?
Probably not if somebody else had done what Pep's done, I think, in the previous 2 years. I think, no, they would get a little bit of leeway. But I think there's no doubt that there are going to be expectations at Manchester City next year that are very high. They disappointed themselves again, and it disappointed me, actually, in the Champions League. I thought that performance against Lyon was almost unbelievably bad. For a Manchester City team, and I'd actually said right at the start of the season that I thought PSG and Manchester City would be the Champions League final. So I was pretty devastated, having seen PSG making progress on the other side, that City went out with a bit of a whimper against Lyon. They will need to be better in the Premier League. I think they will be better in the Premier League. They're undoubtedly going to miss David Silva. I think he is probably the most underrated player in Premier League history. For me, he's in the top 5 or 6 players that's played in this league since it was formed in 1992. I don't think he gets nearly enough praise. He will be badly missed by Manchester City because he's been an incredible footballer for them. And even this last season, where his influence had started to wane, you find that they weren't quite as clever around the box in some of those games where they faced, packed defences, whether that was Arsenal in the cup semi-final, or whether it was the Southampton game that they lost after the restart in the league, and there were other examples earlier in the season as well. So I think they will have to be better, both in terms of having that bit of quality and clinical edge around the opposition penalty area. I'm not entirely convinced that Gabriel Jesus is an answer at centre forward if Sergio Aguero is continuing to pick up these knocks that are becoming all too frequent now. I think there is cause for concern up front as a central striker, but the main problems are at the back. There's no question about that. They give away too many soft goals. They've not replaced the leadership of Vincent Kompany. They seem to have lost faith completely with John Stones. And obviously Laporte missed a huge chunk of this season. Now, I don't think it's as simple as having Laporte back and fit for 38 games, though that will undoubtedly help. I think they need to be better defensively as a unit. I think they've missed, again, I don't think Fernandinho has quite been the influence in this past season that he has in the past. it was Rodri's first season in English football. He's been signed as the replacement. You have to give him the benefit of a little bit of the doubt, but I think at the moment he's a bit too nice. Fernandinho has made a career out of making the necessary cynical foul, and I think at times this season Manchester City lacked that. So where in the past a player who was about to start running at their defence would have been pulled back and it would have been a free kick, I think too often those runs were allowed to go unchecked. They will have to improve defensively. I think Nathan Ake is a good Premier League player. I'm not convinced he's necessarily the missing piece. So there is still a question at centre-half. But I think from the season past, the thing that stands out about Manchester City is a number of games that they should have won that they didn't. And that's games like the early season game at Norwich, which was a crazy game. It's games like the Southampton game I've already referenced. It's the game that they lost at Tottenham, which was frankly too bonkers to be believed, where they had multitude of chances, missed a penalty, and then suddenly, got caught, and I think ended up down to 10 men as well. Manchester City lost too many of those games, and they can't lose them next season. I think different from Liverpool, Man City didn't win all the games when they played well, and they struggled to win any games where they weren't quite at their best, and that will have to change.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Man City are a very, very good team, and they will keep Liverpool honest. I expect them to do more transfer business than us. I'm not being funny, but I just do. I just think they will spend more money. They will sign more players. So far, though, so quiet. Really, I mean, Ake is again, I like him. I think he's a good Premier League player. But does his signing make me worried that they're going to close the gap? They will close the gap. There's no way Liverpool are getting 99 points next season, because I don't think anybody will. I think there's been too much improvement around. So, like, even with no money being spent, I do think that the gap will be smaller next season. But the problem Man City have for me is they have a bit of a glass jaw. It seems a lot easier than it has been in the past to land a punch from which they don't recover. I mean, I'm not saying he's a particularly big problem, but every time City are under pressure for a sustained period of time, the goalkeeper does something crazy, and that was the case in the Lyon game.
Yeah.
As we've mentioned recently, like Lyon had a spell after Manchester City equalised, and they came away with 2 goals. The goalkeeper is there to be got at, and it's not just him. Obviously, it's what goes on in front of him as well. For me, it does seem too easy to land that punch on City. But of course, if everything clicks for them at the other end, you're in serious trouble. It's just a case of, can you put them under pressure? Is your game plan to put them under pressure? Because a lot of teams do go to the Etihad and decide, well, that's that. We'll take our 4-0 loss, and that's all there is to it. They don't try and put any pressure on. And it seems to me that teams that do try and put pressure on get places with Manchester City, like Norwich, who went on to have a pretty disastrous season all in that game that you mentioned. Was it September? I think it was.
Yeah, I think it was right at the start. Yeah,
they landed a few punches and came away with some goals, and that's what you need to do to Man City. But I do understand why teams just take the medicine. Was there anyone else in the title race? We could mention Leicester briefly, but they finished 5th in the end. They really did fall off a cliff, but until probably Boxing Day, they were right in the hunt.
Yeah, they had a really good first half of the season, Leicester. I think in the end that little bit lack of squad depth cost them. I think they don't really have the options to change it in the way that Liverpool and Manchester City do, to bring in fresh players who are of the same level as the players they're replacing. They are, and it's been said numerous times, incredibly reliant on Jamie Vardy to score goals. And when he had a little trot where he was struggling to score for 3 or 4 games, Leicester struggled as a team to find enough goals.
Yeah, Leicester were overhauled eventually by both Manchester United and Chelsea. So if we look at United, who incredibly really managed, it feels incredible that they managed to finish 3rd. But the run of form from probably February onwards saw them finish. I mean, they were in control on the last day of the season, and yeah, you do have to look at Leicester's collapse. But Chelsea had a bit of one as well. Khan, who is our our third member can't join us today. He's got bank holiday celebrations. Which I'm sure he's pretty pleased at the whole third thing. Not necessarily finishing third, but of course the Champions League looked a long way off when they were beaten 2-0 at home by Burnley in January.
Yeah, I think they're a real case in point. It's a long time since I've seen a player come in mid-season and change a team's fortunes as much as Bruno did at Manchester United. He's a very, very classy individual. And again, he's one of these players who's worth 3 goals because his set pieces are so good. Both his strikes at goal from free kicks, but also his delivery into the penalty area. He's going to be worth goals to teams in those set piece situations. I think Manchester United are not in a bad place going forward, but I still think when I look at their team, I struggle. Bruno is probably the one to come up with genuine sort of top-class, world-class performers. I think they've got a lot of very good players. I think in order for them to really think about closing the gap to being in a title race, they need more great players, and I don't think they've got enough yet that really fall into that real top class category. They've got a lot of people. I'm a big Rashford fan. I think he's an excellent player. Martial, when he's on his day, albeit he's a little inconsistent, but I think getting more consistent top performances out of those people is key. To finish third was probably a decent season in the end, as you say, considering where they were. Chelsea, I think when you look at losing Eden Hazard before the season and not being able to buy anybody and having to, rely to a large extent on some of their younger players, the likes of Abraham and obviously Mason Mount had a very good season for them. And also at the back where Reece James had an impact and Tomori played some games, then Chelsea can be relatively satisfied with the outcome of their season. And we'll talk another time about what's next for Chelsea, because I think the expectations have obviously changed given what they've spent in the transfer market. But I think just looking at the season just gone, I didn't think Chelsea would make the top 4, and so I think even though they sort of stuttered across the line a little bit at the end, I think that's a reasonable effort from them.
Yeah, I mean, Chelsea's goal was probably to get into the top 4 if possible. Obviously, quite an inexperienced manager in Lampard, and they set up to play decent football. What I look at Chelsea though is, and this is not going to be an easy problem for them to fix, because good goalkeepers don't grow on trees, but they do not have a good goalkeeper. I'm not hatist. A good goalkeeper is a good goalkeeper, but Kepa is too small, and that's why he regularly gets beaten from 30 yards.
I think they do need a new goalkeeper. They struggle for a goalkeeper. I think defensively they weren't good enough. Maybe I'm sensitive to it as an Arsenal fan. A lot is quite rightly said about Arsenal's defending, which is not great. Arsenal had the second worst defensive record in the top 8. The worst defensive record in the top 8, 6 goals worse than Arsenal's, was Chelsea's.
Yeah, they ship a lot of goals.
I think part of that is their defenders aren't good enough individually, and the goalkeeper position has been a problem for them. But I think part of it as well is the way they set up. They set up to be very open, to be very front-footed, and maybe the next stage in their development is to learn that at times you're going to have to shut up shop a little bit, and kind of play a little bit more reserved in certain situations.
I think the bonkers game at Anfield that finished 5-3 just before the end of the season was a perfect illustration of Chelsea's problems, because they scored 3 good. I mean, Pulisic came off the bench and really put us on the back foot, but they were 4-1 down at that point. And yeah, I just look at the goalkeeper and think, put the ball on him from corners, and if you've got someone who's good at shooting from long range, have a go, because he does regularly seem to get beat from 30 yards. But as you say, it's a unit problem. It's not just any one player. It's a unit problem. But the goalkeeper is particularly susceptible, I think. Yeah,
I didn't think he was worth the money they paid when they signed him, and I've not changed my mind.
No, I think from what I understand, Chelsea's first choice was Alisson, but we stopped trying to be clever and just paid the money out for Alisson. after Loris Karius started making mistakes in pre-season games. We just got on with it, and that left them with not getting their first choice, and they paid, well, it was it 75 million for Kepa?
I think it's 72. I think it was a lot of money.
Way too much. They have been linked with Oblak. Anyone who negotiates with Atletico Madrid needs to be switched on. If we then switch our focus towards the bottom end of the table, we'll come to the best of the rest later on. I thought when the season restarted, Norwich would look at their fixtures and think, we have a chance here. We play teams around us. We have a chance. They normally carry a goal scoring threat, but Norwich were absolutely dreadful when the season restarted, and in the end were relegated with change to spur.
Yeah, I feel a little bit for Norwich. I do a sort of annual predictions competition, and I was the only person the year that Norwich won the Championship who even had them predicted in the top 6. I think I had them predicted to come third. And obviously they went and won the Championship, and it was a surprise to a lot of people. I don't think many people expected Norwich to come up. They're almost a classic case of they came up without really being ready to come up. I think they probably knew they were going to face a season-long battle. They've got some decent young players. Obviously, the young left back who your club tried to buy down before the price got a little ridiculous. Jamal Lewis, I think, is a good player. I think Max Aarons, the young right back, is a really good player. They are modern Premier League fullbacks. They get up and down. They're athletic. They're quick. They can cross the ball. I think. Obviously, Cantwell's had a terrific season, and there'll be one or two Premier League clubs I would have thought having a look at him and thinking about whether he could improve their side. But too many of the positions on the field, it felt like Norwich had kind of journeyman people who weren't really good enough and won't necessarily benefit from the experience. That they don't look to me like a side that's necessarily going to bounce straight back, and I might be wrong about that. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Norwich. I think it's just that their kit is so different. That sort of yellow and green is just something you don't see a lot. They bring a bit of colour to the Premier League, but I think it was probably inevitable that they would go. And while they have some good young players, I think there's some question marks there as well. I think in terms of the other two, I don't think too many people, while a lot of people would have thought that Norwich would go, I don't think too many people would have started the season saying Watford and Bournemouth would be the others. And I think in both cases, there's a bit of a story of mismanagement to tell. And at Watford, finally it caught up with them changing manager every 3 weeks and not really seeming to have a lot of consistency in their recruitment policy. I think their recruitment policy when they first came into the Premier League was really good, and I think it's slowly sort of deteriorated the longer they've been here. And Bournemouth, I think, that their better players struggled to make an impact on the season. They suffered some injuries. But again, and I'm an Eddie Howe fan, I think you have to look at the recruitment at Bournemouth the last 2 or 3 seasons, and a lot of money has been spent without bringing in people who made the team better, for the most part. Yes, Ake came in, and obviously they've sold him on for big money. David Brooks, who missed a lot of the season, is a really good young player, and I think they definitely did miss him. But if you think about Eddie Howe's recruitment again, when Bournemouth first came into the Premier League, or just before, and he was finding the Josh Kings and the Callum Wilsons and the Ryan Frasers of this world, and reviving Junior Stanislas's career and bringing these people in for a pittance and turning them into really valuable assets. And then you look at what they've done in the last few years, and they've helped Liverpool win the league because they've kept giving you a load of money for some of your average squad players.
Brad Smith and Jordan Ibe.
Yeah, and Solanke as well. I mean, Solanke's been an absolute disaster there. I think ultimately, if you recruit badly in the Premier League, eventually it catches up with you, and I fear for both Watford and Bournemouth. It's long-term strategy more than just performance over the course of 38 games that's caught up with them.
I mean, I look at Bournemouth, and there's someone I always like playing Bournemouth because we keep beating them, because they try and play football. They don't just sit in and try and grab a 0-0. They try and play football, which of course is absolutely perfect for when you're playing the likes of Liverpool and whatnot. So I always look forward to Bournemouth games, and I do think the league will be a poorer place for them being out of it. But I mean, they went to Everton and won pretty easily on the last day of the season.
Yeah, they finally found some form, didn't they? Right at the end, when it was almost too late, they won a couple of games. They played really well at Manchester City that night, when I thought they were probably value for a point, and I think they lost 2-1. But the last 10 minutes had City really on the ropes and just couldn't quite force an equaliser. And it just felt like it was too little, too late for them ultimately. And I think they will be frustrated with themselves, because I think if you look around the squad at Bournemouth, there was enough good players to stay in the Premier League, and so they'll be very, very disappointed that they haven't managed to do that.
Yeah, you look at the start of the season. Yeah, I know they had injuries, as you've rightly said. You didn't look at that and think, oh well, Bournemouth are going to struggle this season. You thought Bournemouth will be possibly lower mid-table, possibly upper mid-table, depending on what happens. But yeah, as you say, some pretty poor recruitment has finally caught up with them. With regards to Watford, I just don't understand what and this is no disrespect to him. What can Hayden Mullins bring for 2 games that Nigel Pearson couldn't?
Well, indeed, Dan. I think look, it is true that the Pearson bounce had kind of worn off, and that is a fair comment from Watford's part, but to get rid of Nigel Pearson and thrust poor old Hayden Mullins, who was the youth team coach, into can you get us some points from, I think they played Manchester City and Arsenal. We need a win to stay in the Premier League, Hayden. There you go. Good luck. I just thought it was strange planning. But again, I think you have to look at more than just the decision to replace Nigel Pearson. You have to look at the decision to replace Javi Gracia, who had done a really good job the year before, got them to a cup final. Yes, they had a poor start, but they rushed to move him on. They went back to Quique Sanchez Flores. That worked well for them the first time, not so well this time. You can't have 4 or 5 managers in the Premier League season and expect to stay in the league.
No, it reminded me of that Paddy Power advert where they had a manager being sacked at half time, just like going through a revolving door, coming out with a new manager. That's certainly how it feels at Watford sometimes, and they've paid for it. You're right. That's not a sustainable model. For those who stayed up, Aston Villa had a close squeak. I think that they hit form at just the right time. They played quite well in the game at Anfield, but didn't take they had a few chances on the break and didn't take them. Jack Grealish really stood up to the plate for them. Captain, it's his team. Do you think Villa should be pleased at just squeaking?
Yeah, I didn't love their strategy right from the start of the season. They followed what seemed to me to be the flawed Fulham model from the year before, which was win the playoffs and then bring in 12 different players. But I think they did just find a settled system and a settled squad at the right time. They were a team that probably were helped by the shutdown. I felt that when the games restarted, Villa looked more solid defensively. I think that was the big thing. They obviously had the very lucky break in the Sheffield United game, which, somebody will want to look at and consider the long-term implications of that. But I think ultimately they did just stand up enough at the end of the season and deserved, I think, of the teams down there just to squeak to be safe. They're a big club, Aston Villa. It's good to have them in the Premier League. 17th was probably just about okay for the first year back, but I think going forward they'll want to be pushing up towards the middle of the table.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? As well, I really like Dean Smith. He seems like a really decent fella, and I was pretty happy for him in the end. I'm neither here nor there about Aston Villa personally, but yeah, they are a big club. Brighton and West Ham finished just above, although Brighton in the end stayed up pretty comfortably. Brighton took a real shine into the manager and gave him a new 6-year contract. Graham Potter, only for them to really have a terrible run of form, and they were in big trouble at one point. West Ham went back to David Moyes, and in the end it worked out for them again. At one point it looked as though they may be going down. Do you think that's about par for Brighton? I don't think anyone would argue that West Ham have achieved.
No, it is about par for Brighton. I think they're a club I look at for next season and think, are they the Bournemouth where it's just going to eventually catch up with them? West Ham, I think, would have gone down had they not made the change to David Moyes. I think he did a really good job keeping them up the first time. The West Ham ownership has big ideas, and Pellegrini was more of a name and more exciting. But his teams lacked structure, they lacked coherence. They obviously suffered massively as well, you have to say, when Lucas Fabianski was out. He has been consistently one of West Ham's best players. And when he missed games, and they had that Spanish guy who they've just released and whose name escapes me in goal, and he was an absolute disaster.
He was a terrible goalkeeper.
And then I think Alvin Martin's son played a couple of games, didn't he? And he must be about 40 by this point in his career. So, it was an underachievement for West Ham. It's about par for Brighton. If Brighton finish 15th again next year, they'd snap your hand off. I mean, Graham Potter, I remember him. I grew up in Stoke-on-Trent. I remember him as a bang average left back for Stoke City in the mid-90s. Potter for the Potters. And then obviously he also came to the Emirates a couple of years ago and beat us with his Swedish part-time team. So he's somebody whose career I've kind of had a bit of an eye on from afar. He obviously wants to change the way that Brighton play. I saw them at Newcastle, I think, in Chris Hughton's last season, and my goodness, it was one of the most dire games of football I've ever had the misfortune to witness. And they clearly are trying to be a bit more of an expansive football team and to get it down and pass it and be a bit more creative. I just don't know at the moment if they've got the right mix of players to make that style successful ultimately.
Roberto was the goalkeeper at West Ham.
That's right, Roberto. That's his name.
Dreadful. He was making mistakes on a weekly basis. Again, kudos to Brighton. They try and play football the right way. They gave us a couple of good games. That they were really hard-fought wins over Brighton on both occasions. Who do you think overachieved, Paul? I think there's a couple of candidates there. One manager I would like to give kudos to is Steve Bruce. He came into Newcastle after Rafa had gone, and obviously Rafa was very popular with the Newcastle fans, and there was a feeling that he was a bit of a Mike Ashley mouthpiece, but I think Steve Bruce deserves a lot of credit for the job he's done with Newcastle.
Yeah, so he had a very Rafa-like season in the end for Newcastle, essentially, which was that they weren't the most entertaining in the world. They struggled to score goals, but they got good value for their goals, and that was always the same with Rafa's teams. Newcastle scored 38 goals in 38 games. They managed to get 44 points. The sort of production they get for their goals is very high. I think Steve Bruce did do a good job because it wasn't a nice situation he stepped into. It's obviously the job Steve Bruce has always wanted. I think that's pretty fair to say. He's from that part of the world. He understands, I think, the importance of that football club to its area, and it is more important to its area than a lot of football clubs. And to the people of Newcastle, it's a hugely important part of their lives. They, I think, probably slightly overachieved or about par for the players they have. But I think that at times Steve Bruce in his career has got a bit of a bum reputation as being a guy who kind of only does relegation scraps. And actually, his record when his teams get into relegation scraps is not that great. He generally gets relegated. What he's actually quite good at is keeping teams just above that morass of mess at the bottom of the league, and he did that very successfully at Wigan for a number of years. He did it at Sunderland for a couple of seasons. He's obviously done it again at Newcastle. I think the other big overachievers we've already touched a little bit on Leicester, but both Sheffield United and Wolves, I think because Wolves finished 7th the previous season as well, they've almost gone a bit under the radar. No one should think it's kind of normal for Wolves to keep finishing top 7 in the Premier League. These are some of the best seasons Wolves have had in 50, 60 years. And Nuno Santos has done a terrific job there. So I think they deserve some credit. The Wolves' problem, if anything, is they don't know when to stick and when to twist. I think they draw games that they have the ability to win because they aren't quite willing at times to just gamble losing to try and win a game. Sheffield United, obviously, first season up, and again, I think they only scored 39 goals. So to finish 9th in the Premier League and have won 14 games when you've only scored 39 times is a real achievement. Chris Wilder's been a very, very good manager in the lower leagues for a long time. I think anyone who's followed his career isn't surprised he's ended up as a Premier League manager.
What a superb job he's done.
He's done an incredible job, and they play a really interesting way. It's not necessarily the purest of football, but equally it's not defensive and boring. They're quite attacking in a strange way for a team that only scored 39 times. They use their wing backs and they push them on, and they're not afraid to hit the diagonal ball. And I think they've got a style they really believe in. They don't change it too much. They're not one of these teams who come up and say, well, we play Manchester City, we play with 9 behind the ball. No, they try and play their system every week, and they believe in their system. And it certainly worked for them last season. It was an incredible achievement.
Yeah, really, really impressed with Sheffield United. Every time I saw them, even if they're not necessarily playing well, they'll give you 150%. And I was very impressed with them whenever I saw them. And same goes for Wolves as well. I think Wolves are a really good team to watch. I think the problem they have now is trying to keep this team together. Obviously, Matt Doherty has already left for Spurs. They do have money to spend. It seems some strange transfers, really. When you think about it, and they have a goalkeeper who wears number 11 as well. That's not acceptable. If we then move on to the underachievers, it's easy for me to say this, but Everton really need to decide on who the manager's going to be. They keep changing managers and they keep spending money, and then 18 months later they sack the manager. I think it's a lot more difficult to sack Carlo Ancelotti than it is Ronald Koeman or Marco Silva or Sam Allardyce, but
you mean Barcelona manager Ronald Koeman?
Yes, that man. Yes. Although the AS are already starting to blame him for the Lionel Messi situation, so that could be a moot point.
So yeah, I think when you look at the underachievers, I think there's 3 really obvious ones. There's West Ham we've already touched on. There's Everton you've already alluded to, Dan, and there's my team Arsenal as well, and possibly, albeit they finished 6th, I think Tottenham a little bit as well. I thought Tottenham were going to be a top 4 team again, coming off the run of seasons they've had under Pochettino, and then to end up in the mess where they had to move on and appointing Jose, and sort of at times in the second half of the season winning games without really ever looking like they had a sort of ethos and a style of play and a clear idea of the team they wanted to be. But equally, if you'd offered them 6th when Jose was appointed, they'd have snapped your hand off. So, from one perspective, potentially underachieved, but equally ended up in a reasonable position. I think Arsenal, extremely messy season, the messiest season we've had since 1995, and I think it's our lowest finish since that season as well. When you have 3 different, again, I talked about Watford having 4 managers. There were 3 different managers at Arsenal, if you include the sort of 4 or 5 games that Freddie Ljungberg was in charge. It was evident to me pretty early this season that there was something not right with the camp in terms of Unai Emery's final days there. I think the lack of his ability to speak English properly really, really hurt him. I think the communication in the dressing room was somewhat lacking. I don't think he ever was able to communicate clearly his ideas on football to his players. and they played as though they didn't really fully understand what they were being asked to do. Very, very disjointed. Things did pick up a little bit with Arteta, but equally, while he rightly has had a lot of plaudits for the FA Cup win, and for the fact that at the end of the season, we managed to beat Liverpool and won the Community Shield again the other day, there were still some performances against some of the lower teams that weren't where they need to be in terms of, Arsenal should be dominating certain games against sides where we should be controlling the ball in the way that we maybe are used to and haven't been able to for the last couple of years. So there's still a lot of work to do there. I think when it comes to Everton, I really worry about where they are and what their direction is. Again, we'll talk more about expectations for the next season, but I would not be particularly optimistic if I'm an Everton fan. Again, I think their squad is a disjointed mismatch of 5 different managers worth of players, or 4 different managers worth of players. If you go back through the names you've reeled off, Martinez and then Koeman and then Silva, Sam Allardyce, now Ancelotti, there's a lot of managers who've had a hand in trying to put this squad together. They're supposed to have a director of football who oversees that long-term transfer strategy. Well, I mean, he really shouldn't still be in a job, because there doesn't seem to be any long-term transfer strategy as far as I can see. I don't know if Carlo Ancelotti can play the system he wants to play with the players that he has available to him. So their season was disappointing, but I think there's a lot of work to do there. And as we've said, West Ham, I think they'd have gone down if they didn't appoint David Moyes, or at least if they'd stuck with Pellegrini, they'd have gone down. They seem to have finally decided that they're going to give Moyes a proper crack at the job. That's a different pressure for him now. It's one thing being a firefighter. It's another thing when the job is your job and you've got to craft and construct a squad that can be competitive in the top 10, top 12 of the Premier League, which will be West Ham's expectation for next season. So I don't think it's easy for any of those 3 clubs to turn the ship round immediately and be back where they want to be. I think for Arsenal, that would mean top 4. I think that's a big ask for them next season. I think Everton, it would mean top 7 or 8. I think that's a big ask for them, and I think for West Ham it'd mean top half. And again, that isn't going to be easy. So all 3 of them underachieved, but they underachieved for reasons of kind of fundamental structure of their playing squad.
I think the one that I want to touch on the most there is Tottenham. Like, they gave us a really difficult time whenever we played them the season previous, and obviously we beat them in Madrid, but it was not an easy game, and there was constant talk of unhappiness in the camp for until Pochettino did get sacked. It's almost as though he's taken them as far as he could. But do you think Mourinho's the right fit? Given, I mean, I'm not commenting on Mourinho's coaching because he's clearly had results, but is he the right fit for a job where money is not going to be forthcoming? It seems as though Tottenham are not going to be dipping into the transfer market too much.
No, it's a strange fit for Jose, I think, as well. There is still, and I live among Spurs fans, and there is still an expectation from Tottenham fans of a certain way of playing and approaching the game. I think Pochettino did an incredible job there, and I know he didn't quite get them over the line to win a trophy. I think the writing was on the wall the back half of last season when their form really tailed off in the league. I think Pochettino knew that. I'm led to believe that he thought he had an agreement with Daniel Levy that he was going to be able to do some major surgery to the squad at the end of last season. Not necessarily spending huge amounts of money when you looked at net spend, but he was going to be allowed to ship 7 or 8 out and bring a new sort of 6 or 7 in, and that didn't happen. Some of the changes were quite limited. They bought the midfield player from Lyon, whose name I can't pronounce, who didn't quite do what they hoped he'd do. Is Jose the right man? Time will tell. As I say, if we're looking just back at the season gone, he got the results that he needed to get them into a European place, and that was the challenge when he arrived. So he will look at that as a reasonable success. Again, it's a bit like we've just said with Davy Moyes. It's a different job when you're no longer someone who's just firefighting a difficult situation, but when you're now the person in charge and you've got to have a vision for how to take the club forward. Long-term visions, as we know, Dan, have never particularly been Jose's thing. So it will be interesting to see what the next season brings for Tottenham.
Not after that third year, anyway. We still love you, Burnley fans, Southampton fans, Crystal Palace fans. Just to touch on those teams, so we've talked about everybody. Burnley at one point looked like they may sneak into Europe, but they tailed off a bit in places, and it cost them in the end. Southampton, for my money, had a really good season. It comes to something where you lose a game 9-0 at home, and you still finish obviously just in the lower half of the table, but I think the Southampton board deserve a lot of credit for not swinging the axe. And I know we were talking about this just before we started to record. Ralph Hasenhüttl deserves a lot of credit for sticking around and making them a very difficult team to play against.
Yeah, I was saying to you, Dan, I saw him at the Emirates, and it was right at the end of the Unai Emery era, and Arsenal were a bit of a mess, but Southampton were really impressive. I think they were better away from home than at home last year. They're set up almost with the players they have to play on the counter-attack. But I was impressed with the season they had. They're an entertaining team to watch, actually. And yeah, I was surprised they started as badly as they did, but I was also surprised, as you've just said, that they didn't panic when the Leicester result came. And in the end, they were rewarded for a bit of patience.
Yeah, and it would have been the easy thing to do as well. Last but by no means least, Crystal Palace. I think the season coming ahead, again, we'll talk about this in more detail, is a big one for Palace because they need to make a lot of changes. They didn't have the oldest squad in the league, did I read?
They've certainly got the oldest manager. They've got the oldest manager. They've got an old squad. They kind of need to make a decision now, Crystal Palace, as to whether they're sticking or twisting, because there will come a point very soon when they will need to do quite a bit of surgery to that team. My personal opinion, and it's not because I'm an Arsenal fan and I thought they should have sold him to us, but I thought they should have cashed in on Wilfried Zaha last summer. I thought that would have been the right thing to do, and then use those funds to sort of reinvest in 2 or 3 players. Having not made that decision and probably seen his value drop after last season, they're in a little bit of a tricky position. I don't think there's a huge amount of money sloshing about there, Dan, and I think they're part of the problem again is their wage bill is extremely high. They're another team who've helped out Liverpool's title-winning aims by paying money for Sakho and Benteke. Presumably, they've never seen them play. Benteke certainly hasn't done much playing since he's been there. But I think look, the season they just had, yeah, okay, it was sort of middle of the road. It was fine. But I do again. They don't score enough goals.
No, they do look short of goals. I mean, the thing with Zaha as well, as Palace may have thought, we'll get more for him next summer, and of course, COVID-19 has seen that.
But also his form. Yes, COVID plays a part in that, Dan, but also his form. He did not have as good a season just gone as the one previous, where he legitimately was one of the most exciting attacking players in the Premier League. You can't say that about the season just gone.
No, yeah, that's true. I mean, fair play to Palace. They always find a way to stay on. You know, obviously I've got history with Roy Hodgson. Not all of it good, to say the least. But yeah, what a job he continues to do there on one of the lower budgets in the league in reality. But when we're not talking about Christian Benteke or Sakho, thank you for spending that money. It was appreciated. One thing I'd like to cover before we wrap up, and we'll do well to keep this short. We can't talk about the 2019-2020 season without mentioning VAR. For the match-going fan, it's confusing, but how do you feel about it in general? I know we've talked about it in passing, but I don't think we've actually had a proper conversation about how Stockley Park's finest work. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's been applied slightly inconsistently. I think it started well at the beginning of the season. They had some pretty strict guidelines and were applying them relatively consistently. And I think there was then a lot of moaning, as there always is, when things feel maybe a little bit as though there isn't much flexibility. A lot of people complained and said, where's the common sense? And then it almost looked to me as though the people watching the screens at Stockley Park started to try and apply their common sense. And as we know, when referees apply common sense, it's never very common. And rarely is it sensible. So I think it was applied a little bit inconsistently, particularly with the reviewing of when to upgrade and downgrade red cards. I thought they got into a bit of a mess on that. The penalty decisions, it's the same as when the referee gives penalty in games. There are going to be some that seem soft. There are going to be some that seem as though they should be awarded none. I do generally agree with the principle that they should try and stick with the referee's view on a penalty decision unless he's obviously got it wrong. But that Manchester United penalty that was given at Aston Villa was quite obviously blatantly wrong, and they stuck with the referee's decision. So, I think they need to look at it. I think they need to make sure that they bring a bit more consistency to it. It was probably never going to be perfect first time out. That's fair. I would like to see a change on the offside rules. The game that sticks out is the Norwich game against Spurs around Christmas time, when Norwich had a goal disallowed because someone's little finger was offside, and I just that feels to me to be taking the law too far.
That was my biggest problem with it. The offside, the application of the offside rule. I think Jurgen Klopp's suggestion was to make the lines thicker for the attacking team, because the attacking team is supposed to get the benefit of the doubt.
But I mean, I agree with Jurgen Klopp. I think that would help, but we do have to be a little bit careful. And I was pro technology in football, and I think it's right that it's there, but equally, Dan, we do have to be a little bit careful when we start talking on a football podcast about the thickness of lines, because that's not really the purpose of the game.
Well, this is it, isn't it? I think that to me suggests that the implementation of offside is wrong. If you're spending 4 or 5 minutes, and it has happened, the one that stands in my mind, and it didn't matter in the end, was Roberto Firmino being offside at Villa. We're talking. VAR wasn't brought in, in my opinion, it wasn't or shouldn't have been brought in to determine whether or not someone's fingernail is offside. It is to cut out clear and obvious errors. If someone is marginally offside because of their fingernail, that's not the kind of goal I want disallowing, unless it's against Liverpool. But that's a whole different kettle of fish.
If what we're doing is having to get sort of 4 or 5 lines out coming from different angles, that probably suggests that it isn't a clear and obvious error.
Exactly.
I think they do need to look at that. I'm not quite sure what UEFA are kind of driving at with this idea that decisions won't be shown on big screens within grounds. That seems to me to be a mistake, because I think it's hard enough already when you're in the grounds to kind of follow what's going on. If they're not even going to allow you to show them back afterwards, I just it's not necessarily designed for the match going fan. I get that. It's designed for the people who are watching on TV. At the moment, that's not a problem because there are no match going fans. But in the longer term, I think it's right that they stick with it. I think it's right that they try and refine it over the next 2 or 3 seasons. And it may take that long to get it perfect, and we'll just have to live with it in the meantime. But equally, they've got to try and develop the rules in a way that takes the match-going fan into account. And 4 or 5 minute delays to see whether Pukki's fingernail was offside or whether Firmino's hair was offside is not really adding to the drama and the enjoyment of a game of football. And I think it did affect, and the concern that people had about you almost don't celebrate a goal for 3 or 4 seconds because you think, is there anything there where it could be disallowed? I think there's something there as well that they just need to think about. It's tricky. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it's staying. Football's too big a business now to leave it all to the determination of one man in the middle of the field. And we'll just have to hope that they get better at applying things a bit more consistently as we go forward.
Yeah, it's not going to be perfect first time round. It does have complaints and criticisms. I like you. I'm in favour of technology to help referees because it's not an easy job. But of course, when you have the same referees who make mistakes on the pitch, they're going to make the same mistakes in Stockley Park. And so it has proven to be. I mean, I can't remember the game recently where they had to issue an apology. I can't remember what it was. They issued an apology because a VAR decision wasn't correct. And we've seen that a few times this season.
Yeah, and that's no. I mean, it happened actually to Arsenal early on in the season. It was one of the decisions we drew at home to Crystal Palace, and I can't remember whether it was the Palace penalty or maybe we had a goal disallowed right at the end that would have won us the game 3-2, and I think it was that one that eventually the VAR people said should have stood, but that doesn't really help them. Again, I'm not saying it would have been enough to keep Unai Emery in a job, but there are people's livelihoods that are on the line here. I don't think it's particularly helpful for them coming out sort of 6 and 7 days later and saying, "Whoops, sorry, we got that one wrong."
Yeah, if it helps though, they've had less heat on them since the restart since Hawkeye than Hawkeye.
Yeah,
that was the one where, I mean that the talk of Bournemouth's legal action seems to have died down a little bit now, but Hawkeye's worked flawlessly for years.
Yeah, and that's obviously there was a technical glitch somewhere in the system, and it was really unfortunate that there's ultimately that point may well have relegated Bournemouth, but I think at the same time that system, the goal line technology system, has generally worked perfectly, and it hopefully that was the exception that proves the rule.
Yeah, well, I think we can point the blame at the Villa goalkeeper. It takes him being so bad for that to happen. Nyland, he's that bad. He broke Hawkeye.
Yeah, they didn't have a lot of luck this season with goalkeepers. Aston Villa, obviously, they signed Tom Heaton, who's a really good goalkeeper, and he got injured, and it was a bit of a sort of mess after that with Nyland and Rayner.
Yeah, Rayner was finished 5 years ago, so. But all's well that ends well for Villa, ultimately. I think, mate, we've pretty much covered the Premier League season there. If we quickly go to the EFL, I know you've got a lot of love for the EFL. You've got a very soft spot for Crewe. Excuse me. I think the problem this year has been the extraordinary failure of the EFL to make sure that the right owners are in charge of football clubs. We've had Bolton, Bury, who unfortunately didn't survive, and Wigan. Off the top of my head,
the Wigan situation is particularly concerning, Dan, because to allow a guy to buy a club and then pretty much immediately just put them in administration, just something clearly hasn't worked there in the sort of due diligence process that's supposed to happen. It's really concerning for those clubs. It's heartbreaking for the fans of Bury, who have lost a long-standing football league club. Great little club, lovely little ground. I've been to Gig Lane a number of times. It's a great shame for them. It's a great shame for their fans. And when we look at the likes of Bolton and Wigan, we're talking about teams who were in the Premier League not that long ago. And I know that in itself might be part of the reason, and there will be questions about teams overspending in the Premier League and then not being able to cut their cloth accordingly when they drop out. But it does feel as though there's got to be better scrutiny, and I am not yet sold, to be honest, that the sort of EFL's financial fair play rules, where if a team overspends with money they don't have, you punish them by fining them. That seems to me to not be a great system. So I think there is still a way to go. I am really concerned, Dan, as I mentioned at the start, about when we restart the season in League One and League Two, how on earth do those teams pay their players when no one's coming through the gate? I don't think we're yet through the worst of what COVID is going to throw financially at the lower reaches of the game. And I think the next 2, 3, 4 seasons are going to be really, really challenging. I'm not suggesting we're going to not have fans for that long, but just that the after effects of this period will have some pretty wide-reaching impacts on those clubs for 2 or 3 or 4 years to come. In terms of the seasons themselves, we've already referred to Leeds getting back into the Premier League, to Coventry getting back into the Championship. As you say, I was a Crewe season ticket holder for a year as a teenager, and I have a real soft spot for Crewe. They got promoted back into League One. I'm not absolutely convinced we'd have held on to an automatic promotion spot if the season finished. So we may have got a little bit lucky there. Although we were top of the league actually, and it was points per game that meant we ended up second when the season was concluded. So the big challenge for the Football League clubs, and I think those clubs in League One and League Two will be thinking more about how do we keep the club in business in the next 12 months, even before they start to think about how do we try and keep the team winning on the pitch.
That's the thing, isn't it? This goes beyond this season. I don't see how we don't have a disruption of the season to come as well.
Well, we've already seen, and I know there were some isolated incidents with players behaving in a way that, was clearly quite ridiculous. But we've seen the problems in Scotland already, with the Celtic player, with the players from Aberdeen, games needing to be cancelled. I think that's going to be something that we experience when the Football League restarts. And it's going to be really, really challenging for a number of those clubs. I think. We can talk more another time about which clubs I think are well placed to push for promotion in League One and League Two. But I think, as I say, the main aim for every single club at that level is going to be how do we make sure we've still got a football club to run in 2 years' time.
Yeah,
it always is. It always is, frankly. But COVID just really is going to bring that into a much sharper focus.
Yeah. Anyone who's not been living within the means is going to be found out very soon. And I don't mean that as a ha. I just mean that's a cold hard fact. Unfortunately, COVID is going to push home financial issues. In an ideal world, we'll get. Is it October the 1st where they're going to start to try and get fans back into the grounds?
Yeah, I think that's the government's current plan is the start of October for fans returning. Now, at the lower League One, League Two levels, you would hope, and again, I don't mean this in a way to be disparaging to anybody who goes and supports those clubs every week. It may be easier to socially distance when you're not talking about full capacity stadiums in the first place. I don't know how often clubs in League One and League Two sell out, but it's certainly pretty rare. It may be cup games against some of the bigger clubs, but it's more important at that level that we try and get fans back in the stadium. And if that means the Premier League and the Championship to an extent have to wait their turn, then so be it. Because I think the priority is those clubs for whom that income is absolutely essential to the lifeblood of the football club have to be the priority for getting fans back into the grounds.
Yeah, I think that's very true, mate. Yeah, certainly I would be willing to wait an extra month to go to Anfield again. I miss it. I really do. I really miss going to Anfield. I miss going to St Helens to watch the rugby, which has had all the similar kinds of problems. But the most important thing is that clubs exist at the end of this, all of this, and anything that can be done to help. We should all do our bit. Right, I think we've as best we can cover the football season we've just had. Then I think we've done a good job, mate. We've not really mentioned Bayern, who were worthy champions, I thought, of Europe, and Sevilla winning an incredible record again. Is that 6 out of 14 they've now won?
Yeah, they seem to win it every year. I think we should just, if we need competitions to abandon for next season to fit all the games in, let's not bother with the Europa League. let's just all accept now that Sevilla won it, and we can move on with the other competitions. No, it's an incredible achievement from them. I think terrific from Bayern. You know, the turnaround since Hansi Flick took over is incredible. And just a couple of years ago, when you looked at the Bayern team and there was Robben and Ribéry and Mandzukic, you looked at them and thought, oh, they need a bit of a refresh. And to have rebuilt so quickly into the side that's just won the Champions League is a real testament to them and to the way they've run the club. I do feel a little bit for PSG because I think they did make progress in Europe this year, not just reaching the final, but I think generally learning a little bit more what it takes to play in those big knockout games. Their time will come. You know, you can't be throwing that much money at it and have, you know, arguably the two best sort of youngish players in world football. I'm not quite sure how old Neymar is now, but Mbappe is certainly still a really young guy in his football career. Their time will come. But yeah, I thought Bayern were worthy winners. I didn't think it was the greatest final, as they often aren't, I suppose. I thought it was sloppy for an hour. Both teams gave the ball away more than I'm used to seeing them. But once Bayern scored, I thought they really showed some authority and they managed the game pretty well after that. And were deserving winners.
Yeah, and of course the thing for Bayern is they've got Leroy Sané to come. That moves me on nicely to my outro. We will be back. We'll be doing a preview of the next season, which is scheduled to start on the 12th of September. I've also got to be having some guests coming up to come and speak to us about a few bits and pieces. My next guest will be Dave Usher from the Liverpool. I can't speak properly, I'm that excited. My next guest will be Dave Usher from the Liverpool Way fanzine. Dave will be having a chat with us about the new season for Liverpool. He'll probably be a lot more optimistic than I am, but I can't change my nature. Paul, it's been a pleasure. We certainly won't be leaving it 8 years until the next episode.
No, speak to you soon, Dan.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time, mate. Thank you all for listening, and we'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. And I wish you all the best, and we will speak to you very soon.